was interested in philosophy, he actually became, I suppose, what we would call a polymath. So among the things that Albert studied were physics, biology, botany, zoology, chemistry, astronomy, law, philosophy, and theology. And his writings take up 21 volumes in one edition, and in fact 38 volumes in another edition. He was a prolific writer, which is amazing when you think of the duties that he had as a provincial in the Dominicans, and as a preacher and a priest, and ultimately as Bishop of Regensburg. For Albert and other medieval people, there wasn't really a firm distinction between philosophy and science. Science was sometimes called natural philosophy. And it's to St. Albert, I think, that we owe many of the things that we take for granted in science today. Because his philosophy provided science with an underpinning. And I think if St. Albert was around today, he would actually have a number of justifiable criticisms to make of the modern practice of science. I've heard even Catholic scientists be rather disparaging about philosophy and say that it doesn't really add anything to science. I don't think that can be right. I don't think St. Albert would say that was right either. I think he'd say that there are several respects in which philosophy as an underpinning is absolutely vital to the valid study of science, just as it is to the study of theology too. I can think of three things in particular which St. Albert has given us. The first one is what we call the scientific method, which is the basic philosophical idea which lies behind science. The idea that science is the methodical pursuit by empirical means of the natures of things and their causes. In other words, science isn't just a random investigation. There's a program to it, a principle, without which it isn't science. One of St. Albert's maxims was, don't take for granted anything anyone says to you, but investigate it for yourself. What he actually said was, investigate the causes of natures for yourself. And what he really meant was, don't mix up science with politics. Don't accept a scientific idea just because it's politically fashionable. I remember the Nazis once published a letter which was entitled 100 Scientists Against Einstein. Yeah, well, that went well, didn't it? Einstein turned out to be right. But perhaps more relevantly to us, I'm not making any judgments about this, you understand, but there are people who ask questions, legitimate questions about, for example, vaccinations. Is there enough evidence that this vaccine is going to do me enough good for it to be worth taking? Is there evidence that this vaccine actually prevents me from catching X, or from passing it on to others, or from dying from it? Is there any evidence that it might have serious side effects? People ask these questions, and they're scientific questions. And yet they're shouted down because it's not politically fashionable to ask them. They're called anti-vaxxers and other names. I'm not making any judgment about whether it's right to take the vaccine or not, or any vaccine. I'm just saying that these are scientific questions which is okay to ask. In universities, people get deplatformed for having the wrong opinions. Well, okay, maybe that's all right in the sociology faculty, but it's completely unforgivable in a science faculty. There must be open and free discussion, the exchange of ideas in order to discover the truth. That's what science is about. Likewise, with ethics, and the second point I want to make is about ethics. St. Albert would have said you can't have science without ethics. He wrote two books, in fact, about the good. And what he argued from was he started out with the good of nature, the good of material things in themselves, and developed a philosophy from that which led to moral good, to human moral good. Now here's the thing. Science is predicated on our rational faculty. Without our capacity to think, to be intellectual, we can't do science. The whole philosophy of science, that, we have things like logic, which we use to make distinctions between things and to discover things, that depends on us being rational beings. And that means that we're inherently valuable. The fact that we have that reason, that spiritual reason within us, which isn't a material thing that you can weigh or measure, it's an intellectual, spiritual faculty that we've got. That's what makes us human. That's what makes us of value and dignity and freedom. So you can't do science without that ethical awareness that human life is special and deserving of dignity and of the highest value. And so science, which purports to set aside the value of human life, that conducts experiments on human beings, for instance, whether they're children or adults or embryos or whatever, that's not science, because it's not ethical. So the Nazis who did experiments on people because they were disabled, they weren't scientists, they were criminals. And that's exactly what St. Albert would say. Third thing, St. Albert would say that there isn't a dichotomy between science and religion, or between reason and faith. They're complementary, not contradictory. St. Albert wasn't afraid to ask the question. He wasn't afraid to do the science because of what it might turn up. St. Albert was a Christian believer. He believed the Bible when the Bible says the earth is round, which it does. But he also set out to examine the evidence, the geography, and showed mathematically that the earth is spherical. And his work was actually used by later explorers when they set out to discover the New World. They used his calculations to work out how to get there. So, people who ignorantly these days say, oh, well, you Christians are medieval and believe the world is flat. Well, actually, medieval Christians didn't believe the world is flat. Specifically, St. Albert the Great proved it's round. So this can apply to all sorts of things, can't it? People say, oh, well, evolution proves that Christianity is wrong. Well, no, it doesn't, because evolution is talking about the natures of things and their causes, and Christianity is talking about the God without whom nothing would exist, and who wants to know us and who intervenes by divine revelation in human life. They're two completely different spheres of knowledge.